Gravity Falls is one of my favorite shows probably ever. From the supernatural setting to the multiple references to Twin Peaks and all kinds of other horror properties, as well as really well written characters, an excellent story that is both paced well and also very pleasantly mysterious. And it also has a villain that has kind of terrifying implications for me even as an adult.
Oh, I know lots of things.
Lots of things.
Gravity Falls is a show that I would highly recommend to anyone who likes shows that are technically for kids, but also full of weird psychological horror. For example, if you liked Over the Garden Wall or Adventure Time, Gravity Falls is great for you. It's a very specific television genre, but it does have content, I promise. If you haven't seen Gravity Falls and you're like, oh, I want to go ahead and watch this video, which you should really watch that first. It's only 2 seasons long. It's like 20 episodes. Trust me, you will not regret it. If you're like, I'm going to go ahead and watch this video, and you don't, know what Gravity Falls is, here's a brief rundown. Gravity Falls is about 2 young twins who are 12 years old, Dipper and Mabel Pines, who are sent by their parents from their home in California to stay with their great uncle, or grunkle, Stan, for the summer in Gravity Falls, Oregon, where Stan runs a tourist trap known as the Mystery Shack. Very quickly, Dipper starts to notice there are some kind of unexplainable things that are happening in Gravity Falls. He discovers a journal that seems to document all the strange things that are happening there. And soon after, all kinds of other weird and dark things begin to happen that seem to be leading to some very big event, and a bigger mystery involving an interdimensional being named Bill Cipher. And then Dipper, Mabel, and their grunkle, and all their friends must stop Bill Cipher's plans for an apocalypse that Bill refers to as Weirdmageddon. That was your summary. If you're interested and you're like, I haven't seen this yet, go watch it before continuing this video. Just hit pause. It's 20 episodes long. There's your spoiler warning, and I promise it is very much well worth sitting through. With that said, I want to discuss in particular Mabel Pines because she is a great fictional representation of a young girl with both ADHD and ASD, or autism spectrum disorder. Real quick, thank you to my patrons for being so supportive of me during these crazy times. If you'd like to join them in helping me make stuff, check out the link in the description below. Okay, on with the video. First, I think we need to talk about the ADHD and autism overlap, because there's overlap. Autism and ADHD are technically different, but they can present similarly. I once saw a comic that said that they're kind of like brain cousins, and that's really not wrong. Many people have both. I have ADHD combination type, which means I both struggle with hyperactivity and inattentiveness, but there are symptoms of my ADHD that do overlap with people who are autistic, and the ways that we deal with them can also be similar. For example, we both stim, we both have trouble with emotional regulation and sometimes with sensory input. We both like certain sensory experiences and avoid others at all costs. Both ADHD and autism are variants in brain development, which is kind of why the term neurodivergent was coined. So if you see that cycling around Twitter, that's what that means. ADHD and autism aren't the only conditions that fall under this, but they're 2 of the most widely talked about. I think a lot of that is because so many people have both, or people with ADHD relate to people with autism, and people with autism relate to people with ADHD. There's just a whole lot of overlap in those communities. That said, there's a lot we also don't know about our brains, but we're getting a lot better at recognizing both autism and ADHD and getting diagnosis and figuring out treatments that work with these kinds of brains. This is especially important because medications for ADHD and autism, if a person needs them, are often classified as controlled substances and are very, very hard to get a hold of. And if you don't have a diagnosis, it's pretty much impossible to get a hold of that medication in a legal way. A diagnosis really, really does matter if you need meds, but that's a rant for another day. I actually have a whole thing that I'm working on for my other channel that's all about how long it took me to get diagnosed with ADHD and like the implications of that, so subscribe to my vlog channel if you want to hear about that. Autism, like ADHD, begins to show up in early childhood. Both can impair functioning socially, academically, and in the workplace later in your adult life, especially if left untreated or the person never learns any healthy coping mechanisms from like therapy and things like that, but they can also be gifts in some ways too. For example, ways our neurotypical peers may not always think of solution to a problem, we tend to think kind of in a different way around a lot of problems. Both are spectrums, and just because someone doesn't look like they have autism and or ADHD, that doesn't mean they're neurotypical. You don't know what's going on in their head. And real quick, while we're here, no, autism is not caused by vaccines. That has been thoroughly debunked. The guy who put out that study really messed up, and he had his doctorate removed. And even if autism was caused by vaccines, I still kind of have this crazy idea that autistic people are not lesser, and preventing deadly diseases in children and for those who cannot get vaccinated due to compromised immunity is kind of worth the risk of autism. And girls can be autistic, and also we can have ADHD, and you should be vaccinating your kids. Just saying. With that baseline of things out of the way, let's talk about Mabel.
Edit! Cut away!
For starters, Mabel is easily distracted, and that's one thing that can be attributed to ADHD and autism. In one episode, she and Dipper are trying to find a password to a laptop computer that Dipper believes could hold all the secrets to what's going on in Gravity Falls. Mabel pledges her allegiance to his mission, but then she sees a cute boy and immediately leaves the conversation to go flirt with him. She then immediately commits to overextending herself and designing a sock puppet rock opera within a week.
Hey, what's up? I'm Gabe.
This instance isn't like an offshoot or an exception to the rule either. In the average conversation between Dipper and Mabel, we can see him often talking to her and her playing with something nearby. And we see him tell her often that she's distracting him by being too loud, or tell her to focus up. Mabel can often be seen making loud noises too, and also being very creative. She also knits constantly, which could be seen as a form of stimming, or trying to find self-stimulation. Speaking of stimming, Mabel is constantly seen flapping her hands, interacting with things that could be considered sensory experiences. She'll touch especially soft things, or she'll touch very soft skin in certain cases, or over-obsessing with glitter and making highly caffeinated drinks. In particular, she makes one called Mabel Juice, which Grunkle Stan refers to as if coffee and nightmares had a baby. When Mabel isn't flapping her hands or dancing around, she's usually touching something or she's investigating something in the world around her. She is constantly, again, seen knitting, which is why she wears a different sweater in every episode. Mabel is constantly interacting with the world around her. She's very curious, she's lighthearted and optimistic, but she can also be incredibly emotionally reactive and seems to struggle somewhat with emotional regulation, particularly when it comes to regulating her emotions surrounding disappointment, depression, and anger. In one instance, for example, she becomes depressed for weeks in an alternate timeline because she lost her pet pig, Waddles.
He said Mabel!
In another instance, towards the end of the series, she finds out that Dipper might not be coming back with her to California, and she immediately responds by first shutting down for several hours, and then when he gets back, she confronts him in a very emotionally charged way. She's dealing with rejection, or more accurately, what she perceives as rejection, when Dipper seems to be accepting something that would pull him away from her. This actually leads to a series of events in which Mabel becomes imprisoned in a sort of sensory bubble that is meant to lower her sense of threat and make her feel secure. The entire prison is full of incredibly bright colors, loud pop music, and things for Mabel to play with, such as various creatures and even an industrial-sized tub of glitter. When the other characters go into her prison, they are immediately shocked by how bright it is. But it's not unusual for autistic people and people with ADHD to seek out sensory experiences that we find very stimulating, which is exactly what Mabel's prison is designed to do. It is there to stimulate her, which is something that lulls her into a false sense of security. It is designed to make sure that she is never bored, always cared for, that everything is perfect, and in her control. When Mabel is tired of the sensory experience of this prison bubble, she can lay down in the dark alone and recharge at the top of her little tower, so she's never at risk of sensory overload. She always gets to decide when to be in that and when not to be. Mabel is also seen at several points expressing jealousy that Dipper comes across as being more intelligent, but the truth is Mabel is actually very intelligent, just in a different way. An entire episode that talks about this is one where Mabel is trying to be less goofy in order to impress another girl named Pacifica Northwest, who is the most popular girl in town. But all the ways that she sees problems and the different ways that Mabel approaches them are actually incredibly helpful for what they're trying to find in that episode. Mabel's intelligence doesn't come across necessarily as book smarts, but she is a very clever problem solver. It's just the way that she solves problems are generally not the ways that neurotypical people would approach them.
Look, it's Mabel! Hi there!
All of these things, trouble with emotional regulation, seeking sensory input, seeking sensory stimulation constantly, seeking constant stimulation of any kind, negative or positive, being unable to recognize her own volume in a conversation, being quickly and easily distracted. These are all traits all present in persons with both ADHD and ASD, and more present and more prevalent in people where they overlap, which is what happens in Mabel's character. The really cool thing about Mabel Pines as a character is that these traits aren't presented in a way that is negative or needs fixing. These are just things her brain does. This is just how she interacts with the world. They are a part of her. While Mabel has difficulties with social interaction and can come across as loud and unaware, the thing is she's just aware of the world in a different way. She's also an incredibly kind and creative person, and with the support of her family and friends, she's pretty much capable of getting through whatever the weird world of Gravity Falls throws at her.
Pat, pat.
So again, if you haven't seen Gravity Falls, I really highly recommend it. Not only is it just incredibly well written, but it also features a lot of very interesting story beats that are usually not covered in shows that are directed primarily towards kids. My personal take is that Mabel both has ADHD and is autistic, and her brother, I think, definitely has generalized anxiety and maybe ADHD in a tentative subtype, but I think that's a video for another day. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Subscribe for more videos like this. I put out videos that are about the intersection between pop culture and mental health. And if you want to help me make those videos, my patrons will be on the screen right about now, or they were at the beginning of this sentence, and they help me out so much. I'm about 1/4 of where I would need to be to take all of this full time, and this is also not all that I do. I also have a vlog channel. I also talk about demisexuality, asexuality, gray asexuality, and aromantic topics. Like I do all that on Twitter primarily, but I also put out Medium articles about it, and I'm thinking about releasing vlogs about it soon too. And I'm sorry if you hear cats fighting in the background. They're just deciding that right now is silly time. So, and I really don't want to film this again. Thank you so much to my patrons. I know what I would do without you. Crash and burn, I guess. Support your neurodivergent friends, because we're having a rough time right now. I will see you all next time. Same bat channel.